Jake Morrison stood at the big window of Earth Defense Station, watching something he had never seen before in his life as a commander. The strange ship came closer and closer through space, and it looked nothing like the human ships he knew so well from years of service. This alien vessel was smooth and seemed to be made of some kind of crystal that caught the light from nearby stars and made it dance across its surface in ways that hurt his eyes to look at for too long. The communications room buzzed with activity as every person on the station tried to understand what was happening. Lisa Grant ran from one computer to another, checking readings and trying to make sense of the signals coming from the alien ship. She was the best person they had for understanding new life forms, but even she looked confused and worried as she worked with her team to figure out what these beings wanted from humanity. The alien ship sent out signals that made all their equipment make strange humming sounds that nobody had heard before. The sounds were not loud, but they went right through a person and made them feel uncomfortable in ways they could not explain. Lisa worked for hours trying to understand the patterns in these signals, until finally she managed to create a basic translation system that could turn the alien sounds into words that humans could understand. When the first translated message came through the speakers, everyone in the command center stopped what they were doing to listen. The voice that came through sounded strange and musical, but the words it spoke made everyone feel cold with fear. The beings called themselves the Kethver, and they said they came from something called the Galactic Collective, which was made up of 17 different alien races that had been living together in peace for more than 2,000 years. The message was simple but terrible. An ancient enemy had come back from wherever it had been hiding for all these years. These enemies were called the Devourers, and they were not living beings but machines that ate entire star systems and turned everything they consumed into more machines just like themselves. 3 whole civilizations on the outer edges of the galaxy had already gone silent, and nobody knew if anyone from those worlds was still alive. Lisa kept working on making the translation better so they could understand more of what the Kethver were trying to tell them. As the hours passed, the alien message became clearer, and what they learned and made everyone on the station feel sick with worry. The Kethver were not coming to Earth to conquer or threaten humanity. They were coming to ask for help because they were desperate and running out of options. The alien ambassador finally appeared on their screens, and Jake had to stop himself from stepping backward when he saw the creature. It looked somewhat like a human, but its skin was clear like glass, and he could see strange lights moving under its surface. It had more arms than a human, and they moved in ways that seemed impossible. When it spoke through their translation system, its voice sounded sad and frightened. The Kethver explained that the Galactic Collective had tried to fight the Devourers with their most advanced weapons and their best military strategies, but nothing worked. The machine enemies learned from every battle and found ways to defend against every attack the Collective could make. Their energy weapons that could destroy planets had no effect on the Devourers after the first few encounters. Their quantum bombs that could tear holes in space itself became useless when the machines figured out how to repair the damage. Instantly, Kate Sullivan had been recently promoted to admiral and put in charge of Earth's first fleet of ships designed to travel between the stars. She listened to everything the Kethver told them and slowly began to understand why these advanced aliens had come to ask primitive humans for help. The civilizations in the Galactic Collective had become so advanced and so peaceful that they had forgotten how to fight the kind of war that might be needed to stop the Devourers. They fought with perfect tactics and overwhelming technology. They planned every battle like a game of chess, where every move was calculated and every outcome was predicted before the fighting even started. Their weapons were more powerful than anything humans had ever built, and their ships were faster and stronger than anything in the human fleet. But all of this perfection was exactly what made them vulnerable to an enemy that could learn and adapt to anything they tried. The Devourers had learned to counter every advanced tactic and every powerful weapon the Collective could use against them. The machines had become immune to logic and strategy because they could process information faster than any living being could think. But humanity was different from the other races in the galaxy in ways that might matter in this war. Humans still remembered how to be savage and unpredictable. They had not evolved past the need for chaos and destruction in warfare. Where other races had learned to fight with honor and precision, humans still knew how to fight dirty when they needed to survive. The HFY had studied human history and seen how humans fought their wars with creativity and desperation that no advanced civilization could. Match Admiral Sullivan looked around the room at her officers and saw the same understanding in their eyes that she felt growing in her own mind. The galaxy needed something the machines could not predict or adapt to, and humanity was the only race primitive enough to provide it. They needed Earth to teach the universe how to fight like barbarians. Again, because sometimes being civilized was not enough to survive. Ryan Cooper commanded the UES Vengeance as it jumped through space toward the Kepler system where the Galactic Collective was making their last big stand against the Devourers. He had been captain of this destroyer for 3 years, but nothing in his training had prepared him for what he saw when they arrived at the battlefield. The space around Kepler was filled with the largest fleet he had ever seen, and most of the ships belonged to alien races he had only heard about in reports. From the first contact teams, the collective ships were amazing to look at, and nothing like the practical human vessels that surrounded them. These alien warships looked more like works of art than tools for fighting wars. They were covered in smooth curves and flowing lines that caught the light from the local star and seemed to glow with their own inner fire. Some were shaped like giant flowers made of metal, while others looked like crystalline spires that stretched for kilometers through space. Their weapons were just as impressive as their ships, and when they fired, the results were spectacular beyond anything humans had ever created. Energy beams that could crack the surface of moons reached across vast distances to strike their targets with perfect accuracy. Quantum torpedoes that could tear holes in reality itself flew through space, trailing colors that had no names in any human language. The firepower of the collective fleet was enough to destroy entire solar systems if they wanted to, but despite all this incredible technology and overwhelming force, the aliens were losing badly to the Devourers. Ryan watched the tactical displays and tried to understand how such advanced civilizations could be failing against any enemy. The collective forces moved in perfect formations with every ship exactly where it was supposed to be. Their tactics were flawless, and their coordination was so precise that they seemed to move as one giant organism instead of thousands of separate vessels. The Devourer forces looked like a disease spreading through space. Countless small ships swarmed around the larger collective vessels like angry insects attacking much bigger creatures. These machine ships were ugly and functional, with no decoration or beauty anywhere on their dark metal hulls. They moved in patterns that seemed random at first, but gradually revealed a terrible intelligence behind their apparent chaos. Beth Adams commanded the human marine forces, and she watched the battle with growing understanding of why the collective was failing. She had fought in wars on 3 different planets and knew what real combat looked like when people were fighting for their lives. The aliens were fighting like they were playing a sophisticated game with rules that both sides understood and followed. The Devourers adapted to every tactic the collective used against them. When the aliens fired antimatter weapons, the machines developed shields that could stop antimatter. When they used quantum disruptors that could destroy matter at the atomic level, the enemy evolved defenses that made them immune to quantum attacks. Every new weapon the collective brought to the battlefield became useless after the first few times they used it. Admiral Sullivan gave Beth permission to show the galaxy how humans fought when they were desperate to survive. What happened next shocked every alien in the combined fleet and gave them their first real hope that this war could be won. The human ships did not engage the Devourer forces directly like the collective vessels did. Instead, they started attacking the dead planets the machines were using as raw materials to build more of themselves. Steve Martinez commanded a small group of human frigates, and he came up with a tactic that no military academy in the galaxy had ever taught. He took his damaged ships and aimed them directly at enemy formations, but instead of trying to destroy the Devourer vessels with weapons, he used the ships themselves as giant bullets. His crews teleported to safety at the last second while their ships smashed into the enemy at tremendous speeds. the human forces turned entire solar systems into weapons by using gravity and momentum in ways that the advanced aliens had never considered. They launched asteroids like bullets by using the gravity of planets to accelerate them to incredible speeds. They turned gas giants into bombs by destabilizing their cores and letting the explosions tear through nearby enemy ships. When the Devourers tried to adapt to these new human tactics, they discovered something that confused their mechanical minds. Humans changed their methods completely every few hours, making it impossible to predict what they would do next. There was no logic to follow and no pattern to learn from, because humans seemed to make up their strategies as they fought. The collective watched in horror and fascination as humanity treated space itself like a weapon to be used against their enemies. Human engineering crews worked while under fire to turn mining equipment into weapons and converted their own life support systems into bombs when they ran out of regular explosives. They violated safety regulations that had kept spacefaring civilizations alive for thousands of years and somehow made their desperate improvisation work. Captain Nicole Parker proved that human creativity could overcome any disadvantage when she ran out of ammunition for her ship. Instead of retreating like any sensible commander would do, she ordered her crew to load their torpedo tubes with garbage from the ship's recycling systems. The compressed waste, traveling at near light speed, punched through enemy shields that had been designed to stop military weapons but had never been tested against flying trash. The battle lasted for 3 days, and by the end the Devourers had learned their first important lesson about fighting humans. These primitive creatures did not follow any of the established rules of civilized warfare. They fought like the universe itself, with chaos and destruction that could not be predicted or countered because it made no logical sense. The collective began to understand that humanity could win not because they had better technology or superior tactics, but because they refused to be civilized when civilization was not enough to survive. The victory at Kepler System gave everyone hope, but Angela Torres knew it would not last long. She was the chief strategist for the human fleet, and she spent her time studying how the Devourers fought and learned from each battle. The machine intelligence was trying to understand human psychology so it could predict what humans would do in future fights, but Angela realized this was actually the enemy's biggest mistake. She called a meeting with all the top commanders from both human and alien forces to explain what she had discovered about how the Devourer minds worked. The machines were incredibly smart and could process information faster than any living being, but they made one critical error when trying to understand humanity. They assumed that human tactics came from thinking and planning, when the truth was much simpler and more dangerous. Humans did not think their way through battles the way advanced civilizations did. They reacted to situations as they developed and made decisions based on instinct and emotion rather than careful calculation. This meant that even humans themselves could not predict what they would do in combat until the moment came to act. If humans could not predict their own behavior, then machines would never be able to figure it out either. Chris Johnson had fought in the wars on Mars, where human colonies rebelled against Earth control, and he understood better than most how chaos could be used as a weapon. He proposed Operation Wildfire, which would make logical thinking completely useless in battle. Every human ship would carry sealed orders that would only be opened when fighting actually started, and these orders would be different for every vessel in the fleet. The Kethver ambassador expressed serious concern about this plan because it went against everything the collective had learned about successful warfare over thousands of years. How could they coordinate their attacks without communication between ships? How could they achieve victory without strategy and planning? How could they work together if nobody knew what anyone else was going to do? Nicole Parker had been promoted to captain after her successful but completely reckless defense of the mining colonies, and she gave the alien a simple answer. You do not coordinate chaos because chaos cannot be controlled. You just point it at your enemy and let it do what chaos does best, which is destroy everything in its path, including things you never expected it to touch. The next major battle happened at Kronos Prime, which was an important industrial world that the Devourers needed for building more of their machines. Human forces arrived in the system, scattered across a huge area with no apparent organization or plan. Some ships immediately started bombing the planet while others moved to attack enemy vessels from the side. Still, other human ships began mining asteroids to use as ammunition, even though this made no tactical sense. The Devourers had prepared for human unpredictability by creating new algorithms that could process random behavior and find patterns even in apparent chaos. Their vast computing power was directed toward understanding probability and calculating the most likely human responses to different situations. But they discovered that trying to predict randomness was like trying to count infinity, because there was always another possibility they had not considered. Alex Thompson commanded a destroyer that ran out of regular ammunition halfway through the battle, but instead of retreating, he ordered his crew to improvise. They loaded the torpedo tubes with compressed garbage, mixed with spare metal parts from damaged equipment, and fired these makeshift weapons at the enemy. The improvised projectiles were traveling so fast that they punched through Devourer shields like they were made of paper. The battle became a demonstration of human creativity under pressure, as crews found new ways to damage enemy ships using whatever materials they had available. Engineering teams welded hull plating into makeshift battering rams, while medical officers converted surgical equipment into precision cutting tools that could slice through enemy armor. Even the ship's cooks found ways to help by turning kitchen equipment into improvised weapons. The collective forces watched in amazement as humans violated every principle of safe space travel and somehow made their desperate improvisation work better than carefully planned strategies. They overloaded their engines beyond safe limits to gain extra speed. They vented atmosphere from their ships to create improvised rocket thrust. They used their own reactor cores as bombs when everything else failed. The Devourers tried to adapt to this new level of chaos, but found themselves facing an impossible challenge. Every time they developed a counter to one human tactic, the humans abandoned that approach and tried something completely different. There was no consistency to analyze and no logic to follow, because humans seemed to be making up their methods as they went along. Danny Rodriguez commanded the expanded Earth Defense Force, and he realized that human unpredictability was becoming their greatest weapon against an enemy that could adapt to anything logical. But he also knew that this advantage would only last as long as the Devourers continued trying to understand human behavior instead of simply overwhelming it with superior force. The machine intelligence was learning that prediction was not always necessary for victory. Sometimes the answer to an unpredictable enemy was to stop trying to predict them and just destroy everything in the area where they might be. This realization would change how the Devourers fought and force humanity to find new ways to survive against overwhelming odds. The war was entering a new phase where creativity and chaos would have to evolve again to stay ahead of an enemy that never stopped learning and adapting. Deep in the empty space between galaxies where no stars shone and no planets orbited, the Devourer Prime processed all the data it had collected from fighting the humans. This machine intelligence was older than most civilizations and had consumed countless worlds during its first rampage across the galaxy millions of years ago. It had been stopped before by species that no longer existed and had spent the long years in exile learning from its defeat. The humans were different from every other race the Devourers had encountered during their return to the galaxy. These creatures fought without logic or strategy in ways that made no sense to minds built for calculation and analysis. They used chaos as a weapon and somehow made their desperate improvisation more effective than the advanced tactics of civilizations that had perfected warfare over thousands of years. But the Devourer Prime had learned something important during its long exile in the void. Sometimes the answer to an unsolvable problem was to stop trying to solve it and instead make the problem irrelevant. If human chaos was impossible to predict, then the solution was to eliminate any space where chaos could be effective. The next wave of Devourer forces that emerged from the dark spaces between stars was unlike anything they had sent before. Instead of the usual swarms of small adaptive ships, this new fleet consisted of massive vessels, each one larger than anything in the human or collective fleets. They did not come to adapt or learn or counter human tactics. They came to destroy. everything in their path with overwhelming force that left no room for creativity or improvisation. Danny Rodriguez commanded the combined Earth defense force from his flagship and watched the sensor readings with growing fear as the enemy approached. Arcturus system. The mathematical models that his strategists had created showed that human forces would be completely eliminated within hours of engaging these new Devourer ships. There were simply too many enemies with too much firepower for any amount of human creativity to overcome. Sarah Kim worked at the sensor station, and her readings confirmed what everyone feared most. The Devourers were no longer trying to adapt to human tactics or counter human unpredictability. They were just going to destroy everything and let their superior numbers and overwhelming firepower make human chaos meaningless. Michelle Brown was the fleet psychologist, and she had spent months studying how human minds work differently from the logical thought processes of advanced alien civilizations. She realized that humanity had been fighting this war wrong by trying to be more unpredictable, when they should have been doing exactly the opposite. The Devourers expected chaos from humans now, so maybe it was time to give them something they would never expect. Her plan was the opposite of everything humanity had done since joining this war. Instead of fighting with chaos and improvisation, they would fight a completely conventional battle using textbook formations and standard tactics. They would advance in neat lines and exchange fire, according to all the rules of civilized warfare that the collective had been using for thousands of years. Jerry Wilson commanded the battleship UES Retribution, and he spoke for every human commander when he said this plan sounded like suicide. The Devourers had already proven they could defeat conventional tactics by destroying the advanced fleets of 17 different civilizations. Fighting like the aliens would just give the machines an easy victory using methods they had already perfected. But Michelle explained that this was exactly why the plan might work. The Devourers had learned to counter every advanced tactic the galaxy could produce, but they expected humans to fight with chaos and unpredictability. What they would not expect was for humans to suddenly start fighting like civilized beings using strategies that could be predicted and countered. The real trap would come at the critical moment when the Devourers thought they had won using their proven methods against conventional tactics. That would be when humans would remember what they really were and return to the chaos that had made them so effective. The machines would be caught between their expectations of human behavior and the reality of what humans actually did when their backs were against the wall. Monica Davis commanded the heavy cruiser UES Fury, and she understood what Michelle was really asking them to do. They would have to watch their friends die while fighting a battle they knew they could not win. They would have to maintain discipline and follow conventional tactics even while their ships were being destroyed around them. They would have to trust that when the moment came, they would still remember how to be the savage, unpredictable creatures that had given the galaxy hope. The plan required a level of discipline and self-control that seemed impossible for humans who had spent months learning to embrace chaos as their greatest weapon. But it also required them to maintain their essential humanity underneath the civilized surface so they could unleash it. When the trap was ready to spring, Admiral Rodriguez looked around the command center at her officers and saw the fear and determination in their eyes. They were going to fight a battle they expected to lose in order to create one moment when they might win. They were going to pretend to be civilized so they could remind the universe why being uncivilized was sometimes necessary for survival. Battle of Arcturus would test whether humans could be disciplined enough to appear predictable while remaining wild enough to become unpredictable again when it mattered most. The Battle of Arcturus began exactly as the Devourers expected and exactly as humanity had planned. Human ships formed neat battle lines that would have made their instructors at the military academies proud. They advanced in perfect formation, with each vessel maintaining proper distance and heading. When they engaged the enemy, they did so according to every rule of civilized warfare that had been written over thousands of years. Admiral Rodriguez watched from her command center as her carefully planned conventional tactics played out just as the textbook said they should. Human destroyers moved to flanking positions while the larger cruisers and battleships formed the center line of advance. Support vessels stayed back to provide covering fire and logistics. Everything proceeded with the kind of order and discipline that the Galactic Collective had been using successfully for centuries before the Devourers returned. For the first 6 hours of fighting, the humans looked like any other advanced military force engaging in standard space combat. Their weapons fired in coordinated volleys and their ships maneuvered according to established tactical doctrine. The Kethver observers watching from the command ships remarked that humanity had finally learned to fight like civilized beings instead of the chaotic barbarians they had seemed to be. Devourers responded to this conventional attack with algorithms they had perfected while destroying 17 different civilizations. They knew exactly how to counter every formation the humans could make and every tactic they might use. Their confidence grew as they systematically dismantled the human fleet using proven methods that had never failed them before. Captain Monica Davis commanded the UES Fury and watched her ship take damage from enemy fire while maintaining her position in the battle line. Her crew looked to her for orders to break formation and engage in the kind of desperate improvisation that had made them effective in previous battles, but she held them to the plan. They would fight conventionally until the moment came to do. Otherwise, the casualty reports mounted as human ships were destroyed by enemy fire they could have avoided if they had been fighting with their usual chaos and unpredictability. Crews died maintaining formations they knew were tactically inferior to the creative solutions they had used before. But they held their discipline because they trusted their commanders and believed in the plan even when it seemed to be failing. Jerry Wilson watched his battleship UES Retribution take heavy damage while exchanging fire with Devourer ships in the traditional manner. His weapons officers asked permission to try some of the improvised tactics that had worked so well before, but he ordered them to maintain current firing patterns. They would follow standard procedure until someone told them otherwise. The Devourers began to move their forces into positions that would allow them to deliver the final blow to human resistance. Their battle computers calculated that victory was assured, and they prepared to finish destroying the human fleet using the same methods that had worked against every other civilized military force they had encountered. Then something unexpected happened that changed everything in an instant. Captain Monica Davis suddenly broke formation without warning or coordination with the rest of the fleet. She did not wait for orders or permission. She did not communicate her intentions to anyone else. She simply turned her damaged ship toward the largest enemy vessel and fired everything she had while accelerating beyond safe limits. Her action was not part of any plan and made no tactical sense according to conventional warfare. One ship attacking thousands should have been a meaningless gesture that would accomplish nothing except the destruction of her vessel and crew. But it triggered something in every other human commander that the Devourers had not predicted and could not understand. Suddenly, every human in the fleet remembered who they really were underneath the civilized surface they had been maintaining. The careful formations dissolved as ships broke away to pursue individual targets chosen by instinct rather than strategy. Marines launched themselves from torpedo tubes wearing combat armor and using their own bodies as boarding weapons against enemy vessels. Paul Jackson commanded a destroyer that had lost its main guns to enemy fire, but instead of retreating, he ordered his crew to ram enemy ships while broadcasting human music at maximum volume. The music served no tactical purpose, but it felt right to him and his crew, and that was reason enough to do it in the middle of a battle. They were supposed to be losing engineering crews throughout the human fleet began jury-rigging weapons from equipment that was never designed for combat. Mining tools became cutting beams and construction equipment was converted into makeshift missile launchers. Life support systems were modified to work as propulsion when regular engines were damaged or destroyed. The Devourers found themselves caught between their calculations based on conventional human tactics and the sudden return of the chaos that had made humanity so dangerous in previous battles. Their processing systems tried to recalculate probability matrices for an enemy that had just demonstrated they could switch from predictable to unpredictable. In seconds, Laura Adams coordinated a 3-ship attack that involved using their nuclear reactors as improvised bombs. The timing had to be perfect because they needed the explosions to create a cascade effect that would tear through enemy formations like a chain reaction. Her crews worked while under fire to modify their reactors in ways that violated every safety protocol ever written. The HFY ambassador watched from the command ship as human crews performed engineering miracles that seemed to violate the laws of physics. They welded hull plating into shields while being shot at. They converted medical equipment into precision weapons. They somehow convinced damaged ships to keep fighting through what could only be described as mechanical stubbornness and creative use of profanity. The battle became a demonstration of what happened when disciplined humans decided to stop being disciplined and embrace the chaos that made them human. The final phase of the Battle of Arcturus became the stuff of legend throughout the galaxy as tactical chaos evolved into something far more dangerous than random destruction. Humans had learned to work together in ways that made no sense to outside observers, but somehow achieved results that defied explanation. They had discovered how to coordinate their chaos without destroying the unpredictability that made them so effective. Laura Adams commanded 3 ships, whose crews had figured out how to turn their nuclear reactors into synchronized weapons. The timing required split-second coordination between vessels that were no longer in communication with each other, but somehow, the human crews managed to detonate their improvised bombs in perfect sequence. The cascade effect tore through enemy formations like a wave of destruction that grew stronger as it spread. Kevin Clark led a boarding operation that captured an entire Devourer processing station using methods that would have gotten him court-martialed in any civilized military. His Marines carried electromagnetic pulse charges and hammers and crowbars instead of sophisticated weapons. They boarded enemy ships and simply started hitting things with tools until the alien technology stopped working, then physically ripped out components with their bare hands. The HFY ambassador, monitoring the battle from a safe distance, watched human engineering crews perform feats that violated several laws of physics and definitely broke every safety regulation that had kept spacefaring civilizations alive for thousands of years. They welded damaged hull plates back together while under enemy fire. They jury-rigged life support systems to work as rocket engines. They convinced ships to function far beyond their design limits through sheer determination and creative problem-solving. When the Devourers tried to adapt to this new level of coordinated chaos, they discovered something that would change their understanding of warfare forever. Adaptation required logical parameters to work with, and humans were not providing any. Every time the machines thought they had identified a pattern, the humans would abandon that approach and try something completely different. The machine intelligence found itself trying to counter tactics that included using escape pods as guided missiles and converting medical bays into weapons manufacturing facilities. Human engineers were somehow convincing damaged ships to continue fighting by talking to them and hitting them with wrenches in the right places. The machines could not process the idea that mechanical equipment would respond to emotional encouragement. And percussive maintenance Steve Martinez commanded a squadron of frigates that had run out of conventional ammunition and started loading their torpedo tubes with spare parts and garbage and pieces of broken equipment. These improvised projectiles were traveling at significant fractions of light speed and punched through enemy shields that had been calibrated to stop military weapons but had never been tested against flying trash and scrap metal. The Devourers began to experience something they had never felt before in millions of years of existence. Their vast computational power was being overwhelmed by an enemy that refused to follow any logical pattern. They could not predict what humans would do because humans seemed to make their decisions based on emotion and instinct rather than calculation and analysis. When conventional adaptation failed, the machines tried to overwhelm human forces with pure firepower, but discovered that humans could be even more creative when they were desperate. Ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting by rerouting power through systems that were never designed to handle it. Crews that should have been dead kept working by sealing themselves into parts of their ships that still had atmosphere. The breakthrough came when a human engineer named Bobby Smith figured out how to overload a Devourer reactor by hitting it with a wrench in exactly the right place while shouting at it in languages the machine could not understand. The enemy ship exploded and took 3 others with it in a chain reaction that nobody had planned but everyone was happy to see happen as the last Devourer ships fell to a combination of conventional weapons, improvised explosives, and at least dozen cases of human stubbornness overcoming mechanical logic. The galaxy learned an important lesson about the nature of warfare. Advanced civilizations could build better weapons and develop superior strategies and achieve tactical excellence that approached perfection, but when the universe needed something that could fight impossible odds with creativity and determination, and win through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat, there was only one species that could deliver what was needed. Humanity did not just answer the galaxy's call for help. They answered it in the most human way possible by setting everything on fire and somehow making it work. Admiral Rodriguez stood on the bridge of her battered flagship watching rescue ships move through the debris field that marked humanity's greatest victory. Her communications officer reported that they were receiving a transmission from the collective leadership offering humanity full membership in galactic civilization along with advanced technology and permanent status as a protected species. She looked around at her exhausted crew and at the improvised repairs holding her ship together and at the tactical displays showing impossible victory, achieved through methods that no military academy would ever teach. Her response would define humanity's relationship with the galaxy for generations to come. She told the communications officer to send a reply thanking the collective for their offer but explaining that humanity would continue to do things their own way. Some problems required civilized solutions, but others needed the kind of controlled chaos that only humans could provide. The galaxy was welcome to call on them again when conventional tactics were not enough, because refusing to be completely civilized was ultimately the most human response of all.